Hello, I am Dr. Melissa Detweiler, and I am a veterinarian turned podcaster.
Veterinarian turned podcaster. So how did you get started doing podcasting? Where did this come from?
Oh my gosh, how much time do you have? Because
Actually, we have all the time in the world.
right before I jumped on today, I was actually trying to go back. 'Cause I just knew you were going to ask me that, and I was trying to go back and figure out the timeline of it all, and it's such a long journey. But so if you're not in the industry, the veterinary industry, the Fetch conference, it may not mean a whole lot to other people, but I know, Brendan, to you it does.
Yep. Fetch DVM 360
Yeah.
conference.
Yeah. So I have been an attendee of that conference in the Kansas City area for many years. And in 2017, so summer of 2017, I sat in on a talk by some other women in the veterinary field who were doing all kinds of great stuff. And the title of that lecture, if you want to call it a lecture, it was a lot more interactive than that, but it was finding your slash career. So veterinarian slash fill in the blank.
Okay.
And it really resonated with me. I had been struggling with burnout in the profession. I had not been terribly fulfilled in my practice life and was just kind of struggling and looking for something else to kind of fill in those blanks. And when they started talking about that, I was thinking, man, yeah, I need to do something different or add to what I'm currently doing. I'd always loved writing, and I kind of thought that's the direction I was ultimately going to go.
And when you say writing, what kind of writing are you talking about?
All kinds of writing. Back in high school, honestly, I thought I wanted to be a novelist, but I also thought I wanted to be a movie star too. So. But I lived in Southern California, so that's what every girl in high school thought. So, but I just liked more commentary, just essays, that kind of thing. And I just had a lot of thoughts in my head, and I kind of wanted to just write about. I really wanted to write just about being a veterinarian in general, but I didn't know how exciting that was to everybody. And I knew that other veterinarians maybe didn't want to read about that. So I kind of went back and forth on what do I want to do with it. And I thought that maybe the avenue I should go was to be an online, I don't want to say personality, but I kind of started forming this idea of having a blog and having a website that was actually geared towards the term I'm going to use as pet parents.
Okay.
And I wanted to say the things to the pet parents that maybe I held back from saying in the exam room. I wanted to sort of have an advice column, if you will, for people who were starting their pet parenting journey. But I wanted to have a bit of an edge to it. I wanted to be able to just, like I said, say the things that I was always afraid to say in the exam room. And that kind of led me to building a blog and a website that took on all of that.
Okay.
And I recruited an old high school friend to help me with the website because I had no money allocated for this project. So and I was not willing to spend hardly any money on it. And so I knew a guy who knew a guy. And, so he kind of helped me learn the ins and outs of websites and that. And I gave him a little bit of money to help me get started. And it was at his encouragement that I start doing some audio stuff. And I was petrified of that. I said, oh, I never really liked the sound of my recorded voice. But he really kind of pushed me into it just to give it a try. And I had a lot of fun with it. I found pretty quickly that I liked the format of recording. And it was
what is this first audio what kind of first audio did you do?
They were little, just like 30 to 60-second MP3 blurbs that I thought were just going to be audio files on the blog. Like they were just going to be, they weren't going to be an actual podcast. They were just going to be just these little audio clips that people could download and listen to. And I really hadn't really thought about a true podcast. I had listened to some podcasts. I consumed several of them just personally, but it never seemed like anything that it seemed like a very far off thing. Like, there's no way I could do that. I mean, shoot, you must have to have lots of professional recording equipment to do a podcast. And I mean, how do you get Apple to pay attention to you? I can't imagine being able to be on Spotify. I mean, who can do that? That's not something that little old me can do with, at the time, my iPhone and my earbuds were what I recorded into. I used the voice memo app on my phone. I mean, that was what I was recording.
Yeah.
And so it took about a year, really about exactly a year later, because I at a Fetch conference. And I remember also kind of hearing in one of the discussions that the editors of the magazine who were putting on the conference were going to be available to just come say hi and chat and introduce yourself. And it was like somebody throwing a brick at my head and saying, you need to go say hi to those people. And so I walked over there. I had no idea what I was actually going to say. I had printed up a few little business cards of the website and the blog just because it's really cheap to do that. And again, everything had to be cheap in my world. And I just kind of handed my card and said, hi, I'm doing this. And I don't know what any of this means, but I just thought I would just say hello. And that kind of led into a chain of being able to contribute some articles. I kind of got an email from a certain editor at the magazine at the time who said, pitch me some stuff.
Yeah.
And, and I think that was podcast number 1. And in all of that, I skipped over a whole bunch there, I guess. Feel free to edit out as much of this rambling as you want.
There's no editing of your ramble. I totally get the trajectory of, you started with the audio stuff, you started writing articles. How many podcasts do you have now, and what are they like? What are the order they came out in, and which ones are still active?
So I have 2.
Okay.
The first one, it was an extension of the website. It was This Vet's Voice is the website, and I ended up being motivated to create an actual real life podcast because I was part of another professional group, membership group that was a lot of entrepreneurs, that all different professions, not veterinary related at all. In fact, I think I might still be the only veterinarian in that group, but it's led by a podcaster that I listen to who is about business development, career development. He's a huge following, and I was inspired to go ahead and join their membership group, which is, you pay a few dollars a month. It's not terribly expensive, but it's been incredibly monumental in kind of progressing me forward. And they happen to open up these little, what I call mini masterminds, these small groups that you could jump in on. You met once a week for 4 to 6 weeks, led by one of their advisors. And one of them was how to start a podcast. And I saw it and I thought, I wonder what that's all about. And so on a whim, I jumped into that. It was actually led by Dan, the podcaster that kind of was in charge of all of it.
Yeah.
And which was such an amazing opportunity. Looking back, being able to be mentored in that group, and there was this audio editor, engineer, there was a bunch of people and several that are like me that just had no idea what it actually meant to start a podcast. And they really walked us through the steps of doing it. And I learned, gosh, it's really not that hard. You have to have a whole lot, really. And took a lot of the scariness out of it. And that encouraged me to go ahead and launch the podcast for This Vet's Voice, which I have had a ton of fun doing, which again was taking on the persona of this veterinarian and giving advice to people and pet parenting advice.
Wait, can I ask you if that is interesting? When you say taking on the persona, it is not, do you kick off each podcast episode with, this is Dr. Do you look, is it you? Is it like a nom de plume, like a pseudonym? How is it managed?
Originally, yes, it was what I would say an alter ego. I had changed my name up a little bit to Lissa Lynn DVM.
Okay.
which was just a play on my name. And that was really because I'll be honest, I was terrified to put myself out into the internet world when all this started. And I really wanted to respect my practice and my partners. And
Sure.
I was very concerned because if you put yourself out there online, you open yourself up to all of it and everything. And people are very passionate about their pets. And I had some concerns that I may say something that might not resonate with everyone.
Right.
And if you can imagine that. And so I did not want to put my actual practice, my real life practice up
Sure.
for anything like that. So I kind of try to keep it somewhat separate. Not that it
Did
would have
that
been hard
make
to
you,
figure out.
in doing that podcast, did that make you more free under the alter ego? So you felt like if you were talking to a client in the exam room, that is a different kind of conversation, or a different conversation. If you were projecting your practice out into the world, that was a different thing than you could talk about and how you could speak on that podcast.
Yeah, and at first it was my security blanket.
Okay.
It was, because I was so new to it and I was so nervous about that kind of thing that I really felt like, okay, I can kind of hide under this little umbrella here. It felt like it freed me up a little bit to be, because the tagline was your veterinarian unfiltered.
Okay.
So I kind of used that as it was a little bit of a crutch. I mean, but I needed that. I needed to have that little parachute, I guess,
Yeah.
um, to be able to say that. Now, as time has gone on, and it's been, gosh, going on 2 years since I started that one. And that one, I will say, is not as active because I have shifted my focus to the second one, which I'll talk about in just a second.
Okay.
Um, but I found out that it was kind of silly at that point. I really wasn't getting the kickback. Maybe it's because I wasn't getting the following that I thought maybe I would originally have. I didn't have, you know, thousands of listeners every month.
Can
But
I ask, did you have a, when you set that up, did you have just a plan to try this, or did you actually build a thing that says, I want to hit this goalpost at this time, and if I don't, I'm going to rethink this?
it depends on who you ask, me or my husband. Um,
Okay, what would your husband say?
he was really hoping that this would turn into, a gold mine and a huge money making opportunity.
Okay.
But, for those people who have attempted podcasting, you quickly find that it is very hard to make any money at podcasting.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is, for me, I still work full time. I practice full time. I have a very busy family. I do this on the side. I do this in my free minutes. And so I can't, and to build a podcast that's going to make money, it's like building a business. And I
Yeah.
don't have time to build another business right now. Um, so it's really just been kind of a passion project. But as far as benchmarks, no, I didn't have anything in mind because I had no idea what benchmarks were. I
Yeah.
was so new to it. I had no idea if 10 downloads a month were good or 10,000 downloads a month were any good.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's all over the board, all over the. And that was
do,
one thing that.
do you listen to a spectrum of podcasts, both ones that get almost no followers and no listens, and the huge ones?
Oh yeah, for
Okay.
sure. For sure. I have some other friends in, like I said, in all different genres and professions that have podcasts. So I have one she's a child psychologist. She's got one. I have a friend who's a pastor in Southern California. So she's now on her second one as well. I've got lots of, we joke around that everybody has a podcast and it's kind of a running joke, but yeah, so I have friends who are doing it, and then I also have, and even some that are not people that I'm close with that I just enjoy. I found through links and mentions by other podcasters, and then
Yeah.
lots of that are very well known and have all kinds of corporate sponsorship, but I'm
So
all over the board.
with this first podcast, did you set up a schedule and it sort of fell off, or kind of you would do the podcast and you were inspired about something, or both?
I really set out at first. I was very motivated. I brainstormed a lot of titles and topics. I said, okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna write about. I'm not gonna write. I'm gonna talk about these different things. And I had a bunch of ideas right off the fly. I thought, oh, okay, this is gold. I can do this. And it was a mix of sort of, I would kind of type them out. I don't want to say they were scripted, but for me, it was easier to kind of have them outlined at least a little bit. And because it's really, really weird to talk into an empty room with nobody in it. That was a huge hurdle for me to get over is I'm going to sit in this room, I'm going to talk into a microphone, and nobody's here.
There's nobody there.
I'm staring at sound waves on my computer, and I have to act like I'm having a conversation with somebody. That was very not natural to do that. So
Right.
So I was so self-conscious about making any mistakes. I would record 15 takes for 30 seconds worth of audio. I'd spend an hour editing that and taking out every little and like and pause, and just my OCD really took over.
You could just see the little error. You would listen to
Yeah.
it. You'd
Yeah.
hear the error when you did it. You'd stop and start again. And
Yep.
when it was all
Yep.
done, go back at the end and like you wanted to take out every little thing.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I still get a little hung up on that, and I'm doing better about it. But and I had taken a little voiceover course too, because I had read or heard that if you do some voiceover training, it can help you just learning how to talk into a mic. And so I did sign up for a little intro to voiceover, which really was very helpful, I thought. But see, there's my uh so
Well, that's interesting. I wonder if I hear your voiceover work. I really want, especially your second podcast, I want to talk about that. It kicks off, and probably your first veterinary one does too. I feel like the intro is a little more scripted, and it's got that kind of like voiceover actress sound to it. And then you get into the conversation on the second podcast. You get into the conversation with your friends, and then it's everything. Then it's back to like normal. I like the contrast is interesting.
Yeah, we did that. And I kind of did that with the first one too. In talking to other podcasters and being on different social media groups with podcasters, again, what I have learned is there are no rules. And everybody will tell you that their way is the best way, and that's the only way you should do it. But when I look at the podcasts that I listen to, and they are all over the place. Nobody does it the same. And that doesn't bother me in the slightest. When I listen to it, I just listen to it for what it is. And if I enjoy the content, I listen. And so I've listened to some that have zero intros whatsoever, and that's cool. And I have some that have a 4-minute intro. That's a bit long for me, and I generally skip over those.
Yeah.
But for us, we liked, and for me, the way I liked it is it made it simpler in the editing process just to have a pre-recorded, this is what it is. So I didn't have to try to explain that each and every episode. Because one thing that was really driven home to me in a few classes and courses and things is that you have to assume that somebody is always listening to your episode, every episode, for the first time. You're always going to have a first-time listener.
Right.
And so the benefit of having a bit of an intro is that you can kind of give them that little elevator pitch of what are you going to hear? What can you expect? And so that's what I've tried to stick with. And it was easier for me just to pre-record a little something and add a little music to it and kind of polish it up a bit. And then I can just drop that in at the beginning and the end of each one. But I know that there's some people who will say that's the worst way to do it. And it takes away all the spontaneity and it takes away all of the personality. But I don't care.
So that first one, it trailed off a little bit. What inspired you to do the second one? This is the one I've listened to one or two of your original podcasts, but this new one is the one that like really gets me. And it's the one when I talked to you, you were passionate about when we met for the first time. So tell me about this second podcast and how it started up and how it's different from that first one.
So the first one, what I found is I started losing interest, honestly. Okay. And the reason I was losing interest was because I felt like I was just saying all the things into the podcast that I was kind of covering in my day-to-day job. I was just kind of bored with it. I was like, I don't really want to just talk about pet care. Like,
so these would be like the same messages when you're in the exam room and talking to people. You're kind of just telling people in a wider venue the exact same stuff that you have to talk to.
Yeah, just about. in a little bit different way, you know. And so it's fun, but it was just, I don't know, it wasn't really sparking anything in me. And so I found that's towards the end of that one, I was going through a little bit of a shift even in that one, and had started recording some stuff that was more about the struggles of being a veterinarian. And, we all are, in my world anyway, we've all heard all the statistics about how mental health is a huge issue, and there's all kinds of challenges within the profession just to maintain, like, my own personal struggles with burnout and those kinds of things. And I found that I really like talking about that stuff more than the pet care side of it. And so, and it's really hard to try to break through into that pet care world. If I really, really wanted to try to build an audience there, I found that I was going to have to go places I didn't really want to go. I didn't really want to market myself into that niche. And so, and really what resonated more with me was the veterinarians themselves, and our struggles and what it actually looks like. I wanted to pull that curtain back just a little bit and say, this is what it is. This is the realities. And that's when I think even you and I'd kind of was like, I don't really know what to do with it, but this is where I'm at emotionally. And it just sort of evolved into, I want to talk to veterinarians. I want to be a voice for them and not necessarily a voice for the pet parents. No offense, pet parents. I love you. You guys are great. But, it just, and so through some Facebook groups that I was in, veterinary Facebook groups, I kind of just said, hey, is there anybody else interested in doing something like this? Because I wanted it to be more of a conversation. I didn't want it to be just me lamenting over my personal struggles. So I just asked, and there was 2 women in the group who replied very quickly and said, hey, yeah, we want to do something like that too. Let's figure this out. And that's literally how it happened. And we just started conversing through online stuff. And what's funny is that we have never met in real life.
And you didn't know them before the group in the podcast?
No. We were in some similar groups, veterinary groups online, but nothing beyond that. And so we're in 3 different time zones. I'm in Kansas, one's in Idaho, and the other is in New Jersey. And so, but we just started getting together on some video calls and just Messenger and that kind of thing. And so, well, what do we want to say? What do we want to do? And little by little, we started piecing it together that we wanted to just talk about the struggles of being a practicing veterinarian. Granted, it does come from the voice of 3 women, so it does focus on, not to be too, we kind of questioned, are we going to do just veterinary women stuff? And we decided, since we all 3 were women, that was going to be the easiest for us to speak on. We weren't going to pretend to speak about what it's like for the males in the profession, because
there's the edge. There was a shift. There was a shift in the past few decades where now the first switch over was there were more women in incoming veterinary classes, and then the switch was we turned the corner where there are more women veterinarians now than males. So women are so it isn't that crazy to be 3 women on a veterinarian podcast.
Right. And what's funny is that 2 of us are also married to veterinarians, and so we always our husbands are like, well, what about us? And we're like, well, start your own podcast. I can tell you how to do it. It's actually pretty easy. And so yeah, we decided.
I was just going to ask, in the things you talk about, do you feel like do you feel like it applies to do you ever steer conversations? Do you ever feel like, oh, we're talking too much about our perspective and we need to include others? Or do you feel like it's pretty applicable to everybody?
We do find that we need to, not need, but we find that we do kind of we're all mothers. And so we do have a tendency to bring that up because it's such a huge part of our lives, and balancing marriage, motherhood, and practice, and all of the challenges that brings. And again, because that is our experience, we do naturally kind of fall into those conversations. But we do also realize that there are a lot of listeners who are not mothers, or they're much earlier in their careers and maybe haven't found their partners yet. And, and motherhood is not necessarily the route that everybody will go. And so we do try to be conscious of that. And sometimes that means talking to others or bringing on guests that are in different places in their journey to get some other perspective, so that it's not just us all the time. And And we do kind of lean into that a little bit, but we do inevitably start talking about our kids. And I think that's just a parent thing to do. And they provide us a lot of content. So, but and we have struggled a little bit, and maybe struggle isn't the right word. We've had conversations about, ultimately who is our listener? What is our avatar? That's kind of a term that gets thrown out there. And you can be very specific about, oh, I am only speaking to women who are mothers in the veterinary profession, and that's it.
Yes.
And you can do that, but you're going to really narrow your audience. And so we've branched it out to, we really want to be in conversation with just women in general in the profession. And we don't mean to, we do have mixed feelings about, we don't necessarily want to exclude the male voice, but we just haven't really crossed over into that threshold. And we have had a few names that we've thrown out that maybe we should bring them into interview. And we have had, we had a big group one during the whole COVID stuff there was a male veterinarian who joined the call, and it was great. And so we've thought about doing more of that, but I don't foresee us really marketing ourselves to the men in the profession, because honestly, I don't think they're going to be entertained by us.
Right. Have you ever gotten feedback? I will tell you again, when I was working in veterinary publishing, we did some things about parenting and how it's hard for veterinarians to balance this sometimes very difficult medical career with all the things they're responsible for in their personal life. And so we did get feedback that, like, you're talking about parenting. Well, I'm not a parent. So the fact that we even put anything out there about parenting meant some people felt, again, because of their own stuff, they felt judged, they felt left out. Even though we had special things that were for non-parents and made a point of calling that out, it just kind of wasn't enough. They wanted to see themselves reflected in all the content. Have you ever gotten feedback from anybody who had that same thing? They want to be reflected in your content and they can't because they're not you and they don't have your experience. I don't know.
Not yet, not specifically.
Okay.
And maybe they are having those thoughts and they just haven't sent us the messages, or
sure.
We have a lot of following. We've been kind of getting some more traction in the veterinary student world.
Uh-huh.
And so I think a lot of women in that space, they may not know their path quite yet. Children and families are kind of up in the air, question marks for a lot of them. And so, we've actually been trying to maybe steer our voices more towards the veterinary students too, mentorship, and that's an area that we really want to maybe move a little deeper into, because we are finding some gaps and some voids within the profession about, bringing some of these different generations together. And so we do, at first we thought we were going to talk a lot more about working moms and motherhood. And we do have a few episodes that definitely focus on things like that. But we've really been trying now to look at, well, what would we want to tell the younger versions of ourselves? That's really where we're kind of steering the conversation, is that we'll bring in some things about the younger version of me didn't have 3 kids and that kind of stuff. But we have been conscious of that. And because I have written a few things or posted a few things sometimes that have been specific about motherhood. And yes, I have definitely gotten some of that feedback on a personal standpoint from some things that I've posted. So yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. And, it's not intentional. We don't really want to exclude anybody. And, I think I've said it several times now. We just speak to what our own experience is. Right. And I think, but where we could improve, or I think where we can maybe do better, is bringing in other voices that have different experiences.
Now, can I ask about that? Because I know it can be difficult. You kind of, like with that first podcast, it sort of drifted off. It's because you weren't passionate about it anymore. Do you have to walk any kind of line with the podcast? Are there things you naturally want to talk about with these 2 women on the podcast? And then other ones where you guys really try to shove something in and you just don't have the passion for it, and so it just doesn't click. So in other words, you could try to include all these things and cover this wider base, but it's hard because it just doesn't quite click for the 3 of you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way you're going to make everybody happy. You can't, you can't record and write in that for every inclination that's out there. And yeah, we'll throw ideas out and say, what do we want to talk about? And if it doesn't resonate with us, we just move on. Because we can't force, like you said, we can't force ourselves to talk about something if we're not into it and we're not at least a little bit passionate about it. It's going to be a very boring conversation. And
Right.
so we have tried to, what we'll do is gonna go through the different groups that we're all a part of and kind of try to find where the hot topics are. What's getting a lot of traction in some of those groups where a lot of the conversations happening. And then we're like, okay, well then can we add something to that conversation? Because if we can't add anything new to it, then there's really no point either. And we also want to try to make it where we each maybe come from a slightly different perspective. There's been a few times where we've pushed ourselves to maybe take on what, if I would normally feel one way about a topic and Maria would feel another way about a topic, we've said, okay, let's
Yeah.
challenge ourselves a little bit. Let's try to take on the opposite position a little. And we've played around with that every so often.
Does that evolve during the podcast, or do you do a little pre-planning where you're like, this is what we're going to talk about this time. Why don't we try this?
We generally will figure out what our topic is a day or two before we record, just so we
Okay.
can all kind of gather up, just if we have certain points that we want to make or we have opinions that we want to gather. So yeah, that's usually not much more than a day or two ahead of time, to be honest with you. Sometimes it's an hour before we record. Um, and then right when we first hop on together, because we do it all through Zoom, we thought we were revolutionary in the Zoom world, and then COVID happened and everybody's on
Everybody
Zoom.
went Zoom.
Everybody went Zoom. But so that before we actually hit record, we just chat for a few minutes and say, okay, because one of the things we do at the end of each episode is a win, a fail, and a hack. One of us will share a win they've had, one of us will share a fail and a hack. And it can either be a life hack, a clinic hack, or, motherhood fail or win, whatever it is. There's no rules really for it.
Yeah.
And so we just sit down, okay, well, here's what we're talking about. One person will kind of be the host per se, kind of guide the conversation. And then we say, who wants to do the win? We just kind of say, oh, I'll do this week, I'll do this. And we just try to rotate it so we get some variety to the voices.
Yeah.
Shocking to everybody, have a tendency to talk a lot. So.
And so the ones I've listened to, again, I think you have the natural tendency to want to steer it. If the energy's coming down, you're the one who throws in, okay, do you have your hack, or do you have what was your fail this week?
Yeah. Well, and I know that when I'm editing, I do a lot of the editing. We try to split up the editing, but for just different reasons, I've done, I think, a majority of the editing. And I get so tired of hearing my own voice, and I'm like, oh, I need to shut up. But that has always been my personality style from the time I was, I don't know, probably 7th grade, 8th grade, that I do have a tendency to monopolize the conversation. So
wait, can I ask about that? I know there are times, I feel like there have also been, I've kind of experienced that sometimes too. If you can talk, sometimes you just yammer. Not you, I'm talking about proverbial you, which is me. But there's also been, I feel like there's psychology stuff out there and communication stuff out there and also spiritual stuff out there that's about stopping to listen, and you just have to, it feels awkward. There's a pause or there's a dead space. And so instead of filling it, you just have to force yourself, well, I'm just not going to talk now and see what happens. Do you do that?
I'm trying to be better about that, because no, that uncomfortable pause, that uncomfortable silence, it is awkward. But I am learning now, like I said, through my own sort of personal work and some of this other stuff, is that, yeah, you do just have to keep your mouth shut and let the other person. Some people just need that pause to be able to speak. And if you take it from them, they'll never speak. And I found that in the exam room too. And maybe that's been as a veterinarian, and I need to listen to my clients and I need to let them tell their story so that I can help diagnose their pet. That, yeah, if I just give a silence for a while and let them keep talking, then I get more information. And that's something I definitely need to be more conscious of in these other recorded conversations as well.
Do the do do the three of you ever have conversations, meta conversations about the podcast where you're like, well, I think so and so didn't talk enough, or do you guys talk about how the things went, or does it sort of flow naturally? You tweak it a little bit and then you put it out in the world. How much meta stuff do the three of you talk about?
At the beginning, there was definitely a lot more because we were all figuring it out,
Okay.
and we were having a lot more technical conversations, and trying to make sure, okay, somebody's microphone sounds off. What is that? Can we? Or after you'd get done editing for a while, you'd come back and be like, there was this weird background noise, and in some of those types of technical things. As far as the actual conversation flow itself, that's really been very natural. We've always clicked pretty well, and at least I think so. Maybe if you ask them, they'll tell you something different. In my own happy bubble, Anne is really good. She keeps a running list of who has done what each episode. She kind of keeps us on track of, all right, well, Melissa, you've done the hack 2 weeks in a row. Now, we need to kind of switch it up a little bit, and which I love that she is on that and kind of keeps track of that for us. And we've had very few conflicts, really. It's just been, we're all pretty easygoing personalities, and when it comes to, and Anne and Maria will tell you that they have sort of looked to me as the leader to start with, only because I was a veteran of like 8 months when we got started because I had done the other project. And I kept saying, guys, no, I don't know that much. But, so, and I was okay with that. And I still am okay with that, but they've been growing and getting more confidence too. So I think now it is just more of an open, natural conversation, and we don't get too hung up in how it, and we also, one thing we've learned, the magic of editing, you can say whatever you want and you can always take it out. So
how often do you guys cut a piece out? Not just a little one comment, but we need to cut that. Is it typically a tiny comment or a whole conversation you'll cut out?
We will cut out like 30 to 60-second chunks here and there. And that's mainly for time because we try to keep it between 30 and 40 minutes. So we feel like that's kind of our sweet spot. If it goes beyond that, it can drag on. Unless the conversation really is very, very riveting, we'll go longer. But if I'm editing and I feel like, man, we're just repeating ourselves at this point, then we'll cut out a chunk. If it's pertinent and relevant to the conversation, we leave it in. There's been a few things where we just flub up our words and just and a couple tangents we'll get off on that have nothing to do with what the topic is. And we just went somewhere totally different. We've left a few of those in because they're funny. But some are like, we don't want to waste anybody's time. If you're tuning in because you want to hear us talk about maternity leave and we start talking about our favorite Netflix show, we don't want to take up too much of that time.
You said at the very beginning when it was first pitched to you that that person was helping you with your website said you should do audio, and you already had maybe you had a position already. I don't really like the sound of my voice. Could you tell me a little bit about how it has felt doing the audio and the podcast over? How does it feel to do them now, and how is it different from when you first started? If that makes sense.
It does make sense because it was so awkward. And I even go back and listen to some of my very first episodes of the other one. And I'm thinking, oh man, that does not sound like me at all. And I think the first few were definitely a lot more scripted, and it sounded scripted. And I was also not sure from a logistic standpoint of when I was going to record, as far as, am I going to record in the evenings when my family is awake? Am I going to record only on my day off when I don't get that many days off each month, really? And I thought, okay, I can wake up early. I thought my household is asleep. I'll get up and record at like 5:30 in the morning. Well, then I was so afraid that I was going to wake up everybody, even though I'm down in the basement and in the corner. I was talking so quietly because I didn't want the people to. And then I'm like, oh man, then it sounds like I'm trying to be sultry or something like that. And so It just was, I I didn't know how to do it. And so, but then I heard a lot of other really established podcasters. Everybody joked around with, "Oh, your first ones are going to suck. Just accept it. That's a rite of passage. You're going to have horrible first episodes and don't
Yeah.
worry about it. Don't sweat it." And then as I got to editing more, really the editing process has helped me a lot because you hear all the stuff that you don't hear when you're speaking. And when you start listening to it from an editor's ear, audio editing, you're like, oh, okay, next time I need to say it this way. And just kind of, and again, I think that voiceover course really, really helped a lot. And if I had to give advice to anybody who's thinking of doing some podcasting, uh, look look for something like that. I mean, and I can give the name or the link if you want it. Actually, she lives in Kansas City. Um,
And
it
does she do it all? Is it all online? Like she do online training?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was
Okay.
online. I'm not Carrie Olson, and it's Carrie Olson. Wait, oh gosh, now I'm drawing a blank on the actual. She does she has a whole business kind of set up for kind of getting people started in voiceover work, which is a whole
Okay.
different career that has a lot of potential for a lot of people. Um, but it was really just how to control your voice, how to do some editing, and that gave me a lot of confidence because then I started taking some of that in and then I would practice really just on my own and I could hear the difference in it. And so that was a big, big confidence builder for me. Because I was the person before then, it would take me 16 tries just to record my outgoing voicemail on my phone, greeting on my phone, because I'm like, oh, that sounds horrible. I can't do it that way.
So you really did have you really did have a hang up with the final product of what you said that comes out of your mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. And
What
then
so yeah.
well, then we had a random thing at work. We decided at my real life job that we were going to do a little instructional kind of animated video thing on like flea preventatives and the flea
Uh-huh.
life cycle. One of my techs thought, hey, this will be fun to do. And she really liked there was like some free animated program you could use. And we needed to, she said, well, will you do the audio for it? And it was right when I was getting started with all the podcasting stuff. And I thought, this will be good practice for me to do that. And then I had a lot of fun with that. And I thought, oh, maybe this isn't so bad after all. Maybe I do kind of like doing this.
What so that it sounds good for you. What do others think about it when you tell people, the different people in your life and strangers, hey, I have a podcast or I do podcasting? What reactions do you get?
I get a lot of eye rolls in some crowds. I
Wait, what crowds are what's a typical crowd that you think if you mention podcasting, people are gonna be like, ugh.
so my I'd say just like kind of I don't want to say my local group of friends, not my friends, but I don't people that I'm around that are I live in a very rural area. So I guess
Okay.
maybe I'll preface it with that. Very rural Midwest, small town. And so I am friends with a lot of people and family members who websites and blogs and podcasts and things like that just aren't the norm. That's not what you do. You farm, you get a job, you are a veterinarian, you have all these very traditional classic roles. And so doing something like this is very non-traditional. And a lot of them don't understand it. And maybe you don't even listen to podcasts, so they don't kind of get it. And
Right.
so it may be eye rolls a little harsh, but it's just kind of like, oh, that's interesting, and um but what's so funny that was randomly it's well maybe I don't remember how many months ago I was at an event, kind of a fundraising event here locally, and it was a lot of people that again I would never have expected to. They were definitely not the podcast crowd, I guess. And
Yeah.
that's probably not I don't know if that's a fair term to use, but then this gentleman came up to me who is a friend of my husband, who's a younger single guy. He's lives down in Wichita, and he's like, hey, I was listening to your podcast, like my pet parenting one, and I had no idea that he even knew it existed. And he's like, and he's like, I've listened to every single episode, and he was telling me all about it. And I was like, oh, okay. And so it was a lot of fun for that to sort of organically happen. It wasn't like I was sending the link out to my family and friends and be like, hey, would you download this for me as a favor?
Right.
That pandering for listeners that happens at the very beginning. And I was, and somehow I don't know how he found it, whether it was through a friend of a friend or what, but that was one of my true, like I said, organic, sort of natural. I love it. I'm a fan. And oh, my ego just ate it up. But
so for you, what is the bench? So you did it because you thought it was fun. It spoke to you. You were passionate about it. For you, where is the line between what you're doing for you and the other two women who work on this podcast with you, what you do for yourselves, and how much you want some outside recognition of success or outside recognition of enjoyment? How does that balance in you?
When I first started, I really thought that I was going to go down the path of monetizing the website, monetizing the blog, trying to get enough listeners and downloads. I really thought I wanted to make this a money-making thing.
Okay.
And that stems from my desperateness to be out of traditional practice. And that was really coming from a place where I was so burnt out in practice that I was looking for anything as an alternative. Okay. And I had built this up in my head that I could do this other thing, and I was going to be the next Dax Shepard. I was going to be, one of these just great personalities, and I was going to get this amazing following, and I was going to monetize and all these things, and that was going to be awesome. But the reality was that just wasn't in the cards for that first project. I lots of reasons. I just didn't have the time to build that business. I found out, like we said, I didn't have the passion necessarily for that.
Yeah.
And so then I was really left with, I was kind of in another kind of down place at that point of, am I going to let it go? Am I just going to or am I just going to do this as a hobby for fun and just leave it as that? And as when I connected with Ann and Maria, and we started talking about some of our shared values and our shared goals, and now we really want to use this as a tool to help our profession. And if it makes some money in the future, great. I don't think that it has to per se. We are kind of at a point where we've spent some money as far as developing and hosting and some other things where we are having some conversations about, all right, if we're going to devote the hours to it, maybe we do need to have some sort of income just to offset the expenses. And we're kind of playing around with some ideas.
Yeah.
But I personally am really trying to find my way to, I want it to be a bridge in the profession. I really want to bring the younger generation and the older generations, and I kind of consider myself in the middle of those two. I'm not ready to consider myself the older generation quite yet. Okay. But I feel like there's such a void. We just really, now we want to build this platform of building community and bringing different people together within the profession. And I know how Tony Robbins that sounds right now, but it doesn't have to make money per se, but I can't keep bleeding a bunch of money into it, if that makes any sense also. So I don't remember your original question because I've now been talking too long. So
now I don't feel bad because that happens to me. No, I just wanted to know where. So for you personally, I mean, what's going to be the benchmark of success? How much is it just the three of you talking and enjoying the time doing that? Because you are devoting time. It's not like you're just, again, you're so you got to forget the money, even if it's cheap to do.
Time.
You guys are having to devote in busy lives, having to devote time to do this. What's your win? What's the thing that make it worth it, that make you feel good?
For me personally, I really would like to maybe bridge into the speaking side of things within the industry. I'd like for it to maybe launch a little bit of that sort of thing. And whether it's vet students or conferences, that's never going to be enough money to make up for what I make in practice. And I don't really want
Sure.
to leave practice. At one point, I thought I really needed to leave practice, but I don't. And part of doing all this actually has rejuvenated me in that aspect, because now when I'm in the exam room and I'm in a frustrating situation, I can look at it as and frame it as, oh, this could be content. This could be, these are the things we could talk about, and we can go, like, okay, this really sucked, and if it sucks for me, it sucks for other people too, and so let's talk about it, and let's educate young graduates about what to expect and that kind of thing. And so it really has helped me in my practice life as well. So I don't feel like I need or want to leave practice, but I do want to pursue enhancing it in other ways. And I want to be able to, let's face it, I'm an attention hound. So I like to be in front of a room. I like to be in front of an audience, and I'm not ashamed of that at all. And so if I have something to say, I wouldn't mind saying it to people
Yeah.
in a live format. So, and if they pay me a few dollars to do it, even better. But honestly, I would probably do it for free. So,
But yeah, it is nice if they'll cover some of your expenses. That's good.
yeah. Yeah. Which makes my husband much happier, because he's tolerating me doing all of this. For him, he looks at it as this is a hobby. He has his hobbies. He spends money on he doesn't golf a whole lot, but I kind of use that as an analogy. For people who like to golf or hunt or fish or, do anything like that, you're going to spend some money on your equipment. You're going to spend money on going your greens fees. You're going to, you're going to have money that you spend, but it's worth it to you because it helps just fulfill you and your mental well-being. And so right now, that for him, I think he looks at it like, this is a hobby that's making my wife happy. She's in a better mood. And it's not, as long as it's not terribly intrusive on our family time, then everything's cool.
Yeah.
Now, if I were to say, oh, I want to be gone and traveling and speaking, and I'm going to be away from the family, he's not going to be okay with that if there's not some sort of monetary outcome. That's just the reality of it. So there's a balance there, and we're trying to figure that out. I don't know exactly what it'll look like in the next few years, but we'll see.
Well, if you're feeling uncertain, I think that's probably perfect for the time right now where everything feels uncertain.
Yeah. Well, and who knows when we're going to get to speak in front of audiences again. So.
Yeah, exactly. Doing this during the COVID-19 pandemic, where all the conferences, almost all of them are canceling and they're going virtual and all that.
Yeah. I wonder how many podcasts have been birthed during all of this. I'm going to guess a lot. I think that there's probably a lot of people who are now jumping into the world of podcasting, more so even than before.
I would think so. I haven't dug in, but yeah, all these people who spent all this time meeting face to face, either going to workplaces to meet with people or going in front of people in classes at conferences, and now not having that time, and they have that time in their business schedule to do. So what are they going to do with it? How are you going to get in front of people? It's tough. Yeah. Well, Melissa, I really appreciate you making the time. It was really fun to talk about this.
Well, thank you for asking me to talk about this.
Sure. This is Dr. Melissa Detweiler, and she is a veterinarian turned podcaster.